Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I trust you had a great weekend. We chased the moon in the early hours, but did not have a blood moon, but it was pretty grand early in the morning. My piece over the weekend was about Harare, Khartoum and Kinshasa. I called it, It's the End Game in Harare, in Khartoum and in Kinshasa. I was reading the African Development Bank Group's 2019 AEO economic release, which is rather a well put together report. And in that report, the AFDB pronounced that Africa's average inflation fell from 12.6% in 2017 to 10.9% in 2018 and is projected to further decline to 8.1% in 2020. Inflation is highest in South Sudan at 188% due to the lingering economic crises. Inflation is lowest at 2% or less in members of the Central African Economic and Monetary Community and the West African Economic and Monetary Union, and particularly in members of the CFA zone because of its link to the euro. There is a ubiquitous meme that Africa is not a country, and that inflation continuum, 2% to 188%, confirms as much. A further dive into the inflation data and you will note some serious non-linear inflation spikes. In Bashir, Sudan, inflation rose to 72.94% in December. In Zimbabwe, inflation clocked 42.1% in December. Nothing close to the peak month of hyperinflation which occurred in the middle of November 2008, when the rate was estimated at 79,600,000,000%. DR Congo is somewhere around 25%, but data is difficult to gather as you would expect. I've been reading Yuval Noah Harari, and in his bestseller he says this about money. Money is accordingly a system of mutual trust, and not just any system of mutual trust. Money is the most universal and most efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. Cowrie shells and dollars have value only in our common imagination. Their worth is not inherent in the chemical structure of the shells and paper or their color or their shape. In other words, money isn't a material reality. It is a psychological construct. It works by converting matter into mind. Interesting point, isn't it? It's the truth about Bitcoin, I think. The point I'm seeking to make is that there is a correlation between high inflation and revolutionary conditions. Zimbabwe is a classic example where there are 9.3 billion of zolars in banks compared to $200 million in reserves. That was last year in October. The mind game that ZANU-PF played on its citizens has evaporated in a puff of smoke. President Mnangagwa was cavorting around the world with his scarf. As violence unfolded on the streets, Mnangagwa traveled to Russia. He visited Kazakhstan, Belarus, Azerbaijan before he was meant to fly to the World Economic Forum in Davos, now cancelled, at the very moment that his citizens like Roberto Duran, the second in his fight with Sugar Ray Leonard, turned away from Leonard towards the referee and quit by apparently saying no más, no more in Spanish. The petrol price hike was the proximate cause and ignited the already dry tinder on the ground, Piers Pigu of the International Crisis Group. Sam Farai-Monroe told The Guardian the government can switch off the internet, which they've been doing all over Africa of late, but not the frustrations of millions of people. I said to Al Jazeera in an interview about Gabon, what we're watching across this continent, whether it's Gabon, Sudan, DR Congo, I should have added Zimbabwe, Chad, Cameroon and others, is a kind of tipping point moment. Kapuscinski characterized the revolutionary moment thus: the choice of that moment is the greatest riddle of history. And he also said, if the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over. The crowd is growing on all the streets across the continent. What is clear to me is that Zimbabwe is at a tipping point moment. At the time of the Jasmine Revolution in Tunis, the crowds chanted, "We are not afraid, we're not afraid, we're afraid only of God." In Tunis, it was the self-immolation of Mohamed Bouazizi on the 17th of December 2010, which became a catalyst for the Tunisian revolution. I don't know where the match is coming from, but what I do know is that not even Dr. Benedict Oroma's Afreximbank, who have taken an enormous punt on Zimbabwe, can save the situation. There was a trend change on the street last week, and it strikes me that the long-suffering citizen has thrown off their fear. In Sudan, I saw this tweet from Deloya, singing an old Sudanese revolutionary song. "We sing in our prison as you tremble in your castle." Powerful, isn't it? President Bashir, whose prop is not a scarf but a jig, is hanging on by his fingertips. He has managed to claw his way back into position before and is a political Harry Houdini. Otherwise, he would not have lasted more than 3 decades. But it's clear these are the last days or the end times. In DR Congo, the Constitutional Court has declared Félix Antoine Tshisekedi Tshilombo the president. It is widely accepted that he received 20% or thereabouts of the vote versus Martin Fayulu, who received about 60%. Fayulu told the FT's Thomas Wilson, "I won't let the victory of the Congolese people be stolen. If they don't get the truth now, no one will trust any election ever again." Fact. The announced result is the equivalent of overturning Cyril Ramaphosa, who will surely win the election in 2019, and investing Mumisi Maimane as president. It was a clever ruse by the outgoing President Kabila, but it just won't stand in my view. We are in the end game now. It might be tomorrow, it might be months away, but make no mistake, it's the end game in Harare, in Khartoum, and in Kinshasa. It seems the millennials who are leading the protests, just like their counterparts in other places in the world, think beyond the regional and ethnic dichotomies of their society. Excellent article in Washington Post, and I think that's the big game changer in the continent. This is the link to the video of the Sudanese female detainees singing an old Sudanese revolutionary song, "We sing in our prison as you tremble in your castle." The UAE is lending $300 million to Sudan and sending 26 shiploads of fuel. So the UAE is increasing its involvement all across that area. Shadari's defeat was so blatant that not even the most sophisticated of the rigging was going to turn the results in his favor. This is when Plan B kicks in. Felix, president. Reuters, excellent article. Kabila's aides feared that a Shadari win could provoke a violent backlash from opposition supporters who dominate in Kinshasa. A Tshisekedi win, on the other hand, would be more likely to garner international approval and might help keep the opposition divided, the source said. During the election, one coalition official wrote in a message seen by Reuters, "He is beating us everywhere. We don't organize elections to lose them. We can always cheat." This from Kobo. Judges appeared before Kabila. He took their cell phones away and told them they couldn't come out of deliberation without a verdict. Have a look at the photo. They emerged and declared his Trojan horse candidate, Felix Tshisekedi, winner of the disputed December vote. That's how you do it. I wrote on the 7th of January about why DR Congo was delaying its election results. Look at this. These were the real results. Une victoire écrasante. This is from Michael Shee. Have a look at the numbers. It's a travesty. Martin Fayulu, "I now consider myself as the sole legitimate president-elect of the DR Congo. Therefore, I ask the Congolese people not to recognize any individual who would claim this authority illegally, nor to obey orders that would emanate from such a person. 7th of January, I said, it's not the people who vote that count, it's the people who count the votes. Congo court confirmed Tshisekedi as next president. In one interview, Kabila alluded to Arnold Schwarzenegger's famous quote, "I'll be back." He hasn't gone, has he? I won't let the victory of the Congolese people be stolen. If they don't get the truth now, no one will trust any election ever again. The African Union's high-level delegation to Kinshasa to find consensus out of the post-electoral crisis was cancelled after its call to postpone the finalization of presidential results went unheeded. Mnangagwa, in light of the economic situation, I will be returning home after a highly productive week of bilateral trade and investment meetings. He's sending Muthuling Cube to Davos. He says the first priority is to get Zimbabwe calm, stable and working again. Good luck with that. Sunday Mail desperately trying to play up the importance of Ed's foreign travel. State media editors really have a tough job. Piers Pigu, who I quoted in my article in Rights for Crisis Group, wrote Revolt and Repression in Zimbabwe. The price hike thus ignited the already dry tinder on the ground. After an election in 2013, in which it ran on a platform of job creation and economic recovery, the ZANU-PF government demonstrated astonishing levels of financial delinquency. Domestic debt, which stood at $442 million in 2013, surged to $10.5 billion by February 2018 and has climbed further over the last year. It was the equivalent of printing money over and above the value of the reserves in the central bank. The country has not seen a comparable level of violence, looting and destruction by ordinary Zimbabweans. I commented last time when they overthrew Mugabe that it was so disciplined, not one shop window was broken. But if you look at what happened last week, it's completely gone the other way for the first time, and I think that's what's telling me that it's going to be very practically impossible to damp down the street. Growing number of Zimbabweans are less risk-reverse in terms of a confrontational approach. That's the point. The light at the end of the tunnel has gone out. He meant that Mnangagwa's government, while consolidating its authority politically, would be unable to deliver a sustainable, broad-based economic recovery. 8th of October, I said, one domino that has suddenly tipped over is Zimbabwe. I keep going back to the street because of that Virilio quotation. The revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form not in the place of production, but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor, machine of attack, in other words, a producer of speed. But you need to get momentum. Zimbabwe's Finance Minister Muthuling Cube and Central Bank Governor John Mangundia asked to borrow 1.2 billion from South Africa on Boxing Day. They've run out. Such naivete and desperation is incompatible with the pretense that Zim has a technocratic team in place with a plan to address its financial woes. A good cop, bad cop routine. Chiwenga can deal with the protests with a very heavy hand, and then Mnangagwa can say, very sorry, we'll have an investigation, and still seem to be Mr. Nice Guy. Jason Burke in The Guardian. Sam Farai Monroe, the government can switch off the internet, but not the frustration of millions of people. Then going back to the African Development Bank's report, which is really very good. After tepid real GDP growth of only 2.1% in 2016, Africa's economy recovered with 3.6% in 2017 and 3.5% in 2018, expecting growth to accelerate to 4% in 2019. 40% of African countries are projected to see growth of at least 5%. Average current account deficit is projected to decline from 5.4% to 3% in 2020. 40% of African countries projected to see growth of at least 5%, we said that. But while recovery from 2016 is good news for Africa, projected medium-term growth of 4% is insufficient to make a dent in unemployment and poverty because of the demographic dividend. Population growth of more than 2% implies that GDP per capita will increase less than 2%. Working age population is projected to increase an average of 2.75% a year between 2016 and 2030. Lots of folks term that the demographic dividend, but I think it's binary and it could be a demographic time bomb if it's not handled well. Of Africa's projected 4% growth in 2019, North Africa is expected to account for 1.6 percentage points. Average GDP growth in North Africa is erratic because of Libya's unstable development. After declining for 3 years, Libya's GDP increased in 2017 and 2018 because of higher oil production. Despite this, country's GDP remains roughly 15% below its pre-revolution level. East Africa, the fastest growing region, is projected to achieve growth of 5.9% in 2019, 6.1% in 2020. Nigeria, as Africa's largest economy, fell into recession in 2016, but gently recovering at the moment. But saying at the country level, slow growth in Nigeria and South Africa is dampening Africa's average growth. And they currently account for a large share of Africa's GDP, but only 0.2 to 0.4 percentage points of Africa's GDP growth. Ethiopia is on a high growth path, and that contributes about 0.2 percentage points, more than South Africa. Egypt accounts for more than 1 percentage point of Africa's growth. And you know, I've said before, I disagree with President Sisi on many things, but on the economy, he took hard decisions, and they're beginning to pay off. If African countries are again affected by extreme weather conditions due to climate change, as they have been in recent years, agricultural production and GDP growth could be lower than projected. I've said it many times before, but a sub-Saharan African economist has also got to be an accomplished meteorologist, because rains have an outsized effect on GDP and well-being. Inflation is highest in Sudan at 188%, and lowest at 2% or less in members of the Central African Economic and Monetary Community. Africa's country size, openness to and trade intensity with the US and China are significant, and this is the question I posed a while back about if China sneezes, will Africa catch a cold? Remittances continue to gain momentum, dominate the other components of capital flows, of $69 billion in 2017. And I've called it severally, I've said remittances are indeed a wonderful silver bullet. FDI inflows shrank from the 2008 peak of $58.1 billion to a 10-year low of $41.8 billion in 2017. Africa's gross GDP, debt to GDP ratio reached 53%. That trend we know about. African countries have been borrowing more money and more expensive money, in point of fact. External debt service as a proportion of exports increased from 5% in 2013 to 10% in 2016. In 2017, bond issues from Côte d'Ivoire, Egypt, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia amounted to $19.3 billion, bringing the cumulative total since 2010 to $69.5 billion. In an interview with Nick Norbrook of Africa Report, I said we're starting to see more granularity coming into the pricing of African bonds. Not so long ago, when the liquidity was sky high, all these Eurobonds were clustered within 50 basis points of each other. South African all share is up 1.89% this year. Dollar versus rand, last time I looked, 13.85 trading. Nigerian all share minus 1.35% in 2019. We got an election and could possibly create quite a bifurcated outcome. Ghana Stock Exchange is minus 0.56% year to date. Madagascar's new president pledges investor-friendly policies. And Andry Rajoelina, previously a disc jockey, 44 years old, said we will establish real competition and stability to attract investors.